Tuesday, November 19th.
So if you all would all turn your microphones on, sorry.
I'll call the Historic Preservation Committee meeting for Tuesday, November 19th to order. We take roll call and pledge.
Lynn here.
Tracy here.
Kelly here.
Robert here. And pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there any changes to the agenda?
I move to make a motion to approve the agenda of the Historical Preservation Committee meeting Tuesday, November 19th, 2024.
I second that motion to approve the agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And does anyone have any comments on the minutes from the previous meeting? Motion to approve or?
I don't have anything.
You want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve of the minutes was it October 15th meeting?
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any declarations of conflict of interest for today's meeting?
None.
None.
Okay, public comments. We have someone present. Would you like to make a comment tonight or
On anything not on tonight's agenda?
it's something that's not on the agenda?
No, I just want to make a comment on the agenda.
Great, all right.
Thank you.
So I'll close the public comment period. Any special presentations
We have none?
and business items?
We have none of those?
So it's just the flexibility discussion or about the ordinance of ways we can make historic preservation more amenable to someone who gets so designated.
Yes. So as requested at the last meeting, y'all would like to see what we had been discussing in ordinance format so that there was something a little bit more concrete to say, yes, we like this, or hey, rather than it written this way, maybe it should be written this way. And so I drafted that. If you'll notice within the ordinance, it touches on both chapter 16 and chapter 19, which is I suspect why Michael is here. So there are a few changes made within the chapter 16. I changed the maximum building lot coverage and maximum impervious surface area percentages. I didn't necessarily go through and change each percentage. However, I added an asterisk at the top of those columns within the table saying that letting people know that if there is a historically designated structure on the lot, there may be relief available via section 19550, which references later on down the in the ordinance a new section 19550 historic preservation incentives, which allows historic structures to increase their building lot coverage 5% and their impervious coverage 5%. These, I will be honest, these numbers have no nexus behind them. They were just numbers that I put on a page for y'all to discuss. And then continuing on 19550, pulling from the discussion had at the last meeting of side setback relief of 3 feet, front setback relief of 5 feet, and rear setback relief of 5 feet. I hope I interpreted that discussion correctly. If I didn't, obviously that is what this discussion is supposed to be about. I made clear that there will be no setback relief for any live stream setbacks. And then jumping back up again to 19490, revocation of designation. As requested, I put in Buena Vista's verbiage for revocation of designation. We did already have something similar to that in our code. However, I do believe Buena Vista's was more robust than ours, which is why I added it as subsections B and C, removing what I believe to be a redundant sentence in subsection A, so that I thought that Buena Vista's was a little bit more, it provided more process for me for staff and the HBC to rely on rather than our previous, which did not. So that is the ordinance in a nutshell, taking the discussion from last time, putting it onto paper so that y'all will have a little bit more concrete items to discuss and recommend changes and things like that. I will say, if you'll notice, that this is under discussion direction. This is not a business item to take formal action on. So any discussion had tonight, staff will obviously go through and incorporate that, but I cannot take a formal recommendation to council of approval of this ordinance, as public notice requirements haven't been met, just discussion direction.
Okay. Thank you, Madison. Just a quick overview comment to begin with. I really like the way that you approached it by just having the asterisk in the dimension standards. It's a nice way to keep that table clean without too much going on, and then directing to the place where they can see, relative to historic preservation. Also, I did get a comment from Ken that he was generally in support of everything that you presented. Obviously, the specific numbers are open to discussion, but he liked also how it went. So
Awesome.
Lynn, would you like to start with any comments about specifics on the?
Is it us first?
It's discussion direction, so technically you don't actually need to open public comment. However, I assume you will.
Why
but-
don't we start with public comment, just so if you want to get going, you don't have to wait around.
No, I like to,
He likes
I like to just say some thoughts and
Sure.
listen to you guys talk about it as well.
Okay.
You know, I don't think you have a lot on the agenda.
No, this is it. So
Anyway, my name is Michael Boyd. I live at 502.5 Eagle Street, Minturn. Just looking in your packet, I respect, what this historical commission does. I think, it's an important part of town, for the town and stuff like that. My being on planning commission, okay, we've worked on and we've been working on, cleaning up the code, because there's a lot of different stuff all over in the code. So you can read something in one place, you can read something in another place, and there's a lot of different variables, and we're working on cleaning that up, okay? So what comes to mind when I look at your packet and your draft of your ordinance change, it's the setbacks. It's the setbacks, the lot coverage that I have an issue with. Changing setbacks, like 5 foot's pretty minimal. I think that we have pretty substantial lot coverage available. I think that for many reasons, that I have an issue with changing side setbacks and the setbacks in general, is one, we're historical, okay? And historical, how much are you really going to build? And that being said, if I saw, we'll use Frank's house, for example. Well, Frank's house is right on the property line. So if Larry wants to build something, according to the draft, which I know is a draft, Larry's got to go back 6 foot instead of 5. That 5 has been pretty solid for a long period of time. And we have increased, the lot coverages in general. 5 comes to play in many ways, okay? If you're 5 foot away and your neighbor's foundation is 6 foot down, and you're digging 5 foot over on your side, you think, oh, I got 10 feet. Well, when you're 6 foot down, you're digging a minter, and there's rocks. There's all kinds of different variables, and I think reducing that you know, what if one guy's on, then the other guy's gotta go back? I mean, there's a lot of different stuff that comes into play as far as changing that in the code. Now, Madison says, of course, that if, you know, you get into moving into that further, you know, that'll come planning and zoning first before going to council. But I wanted to come just specifically, you know, to voice my opinion on that, and because, like I said, there's a lot of different variables that come into play. Historical in general. What do I think? I think, you know, potentially we could back up a little bit, you know, I mean, in general, we don't even know, historically, we've seen a lot of people nominated, not nominated, posted, nobody speaks up. So do we have 15 places, 10 places left in town, potentially that could be actually designated historical? Probably close to a realistic number. So I think it's a good idea to change setbacks and perks to where all of a sudden anybody with a 75-year-old house goes, "Ooh, I want to be historical because I can do something that I don't need a variance for." So that's all I have for now. So I want to hear what you
Wait,
guys.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
can I ask a question? Is that protocol? Is that?
You can ask me whatever you want.
It's discussion direction.
I
It's a
was
lot- it's a lot
curious,
less structured.
First of all, thank you very much for your coming and for your comments. Appreciate it very much. Would you be more amenable to having that done then on a kind of a case-by-case basis where, you know, people come saying, hey, this is historical, it's not written in the code, but we'd like to, you know, have a 3-foot setback because, I mean, is that
Well, I,
more amenable to you than specific numbers that are kind of
I-
codified on paper? Or,
well,
I'm
I
just
think,
curious.
well, in regards to what you're asking for, you know, technically, if you wanted that, you could come for a variance, you know? What I think the current setbacks are pretty, like the 5 foot, you know, those are pretty legit setbacks, you know? What we're currently rewriting the code, and what we don't wanna have is we don't want to spend the last year and the next year rewriting the code for the town of Minturn to consolidate things, and then have all of a sudden spot zoning in certain areas where people, I think that if you identified the historical properties would be a good first step versus making it an incentive to say that because your house is old, you want to be historic. Does that sort of explain it where I'm at?
We are in the process of designating the historic sites in town,
Or
but it's gonna
identifying, yeah.
identifying them, but that is gonna unfortunately take a year for the person that's doing it to write up this report. And our hands are kind of tied till.
And I don't know, like, the rules of your guys'
So I think,
board. Like, can you guys potentially,
But it is in process.
can you amongst yourself identify things like, you know, like,
so we did just recently make some changes to how properties are designated, and it cannot come from, it requires 2 people to nominate, and 2 people can't come from the same board. So the 2 of us can't nominate a property on our own. We would nominate, and have to be someone from the public. One of us could, and then someone else from the public. So it is a little more onerous to get a property nominated, and I don't think it can be. I can't recall. 2 people from who both live on that property. I don't think that amounts to. But the I guess to get at what we're after here is, we recognize that being designated historic is a huge burden on a property, and it makes it very difficult to further develop it if it is so designated. And so what we're trying to do is provide ways in which that burden can be alleviated by giving them some other bonuses. It's not to motivate people to designate a property, it's so that if they get designated, they have some means to develop it more economically than if they're just so heavily constrained by the historic designation.
And that makes sense, you know, I understand that part of it, but, you know, I think, it's a little bit new to me, your side here. But, you know, like, I've seen places in town, you know, where they put up a posting, hey, and then within 30 days, they know if there's
Sure.
a qualm or not, you know, and you know, I like, you know, me personally, I'd be like, hey, everybody in town, you wanna post your stuff, let's sort it out right now, you know? But my point in general is changing it as an incentive for people that could nominate themselves that might not meet the criteria of, you know, the 10 or 15 places, give or take, that we know are historical, is counterproductive to zoning maps and spot zoning and everything that we're dealing with as, you know, currently rewriting the code.
Right.
You know, and that's, and I, you know, I understand where you're coming from for sure.
We're trying to give incentives, however, we're trying not to dramatically change. You know, it's like we weren't like, oh, it's 50% more lot coverage.
Can you come up with a different incentive?
So,
besides
well,
setbacks?
we can't do money. I mean, we've been scratching our heads, and we're welcome for any
You can get a
ideas from
plaque.
anybody.
I like
But we're
that.
trying to encourage this and give, you know, instead of it being a detriment to get nominated, we're trying to give some incentives to it. So it's,
And so the 3 foot setback, I can understand your concern if someone else is on the property line, and to go back to historic setbacks, there are many properties that are on the property line or very close to the property line. So the 5 foot setback actually is not a historically established thing. It's something which people were all over the map historically. But we do have this, because of the fire code, there's a minimum 6 foot separation. So if a building is 2 feet from the property line and the historic property next door wants to go to a 3 foot setback, they wouldn't be able to because they would need a minimum of 6 feet.
but if there's no building next to it,
If there's no building next to them, then they could go to 3 feet and there'd be.
so it could help.
If someone was on the 5 foot setback, that's still a 8 foot separation between the buildings. So I think that would resolve any foundation issues. A 6 foot deep foundation needs a 45-degree angle of repose, so that's 6 feet to either side. So I think, and I don't know, most of the historic buildings don't have a 6 foot deep foundation. They have a little less than that. Yeah.
Hey, I do. Barely.
But so again, we were just trying to find a way to make it more manageable for someone if they got designated. And again, I think as Kelly was saying, they're pretty minimal, you know, reducing a setback by 2 feet on a side yard or maybe 5 feet in the front yard or rear yard is not a massive change. And there are plenty of properties that already exceed those setbacks, you know, that are grandfathered in. And then the lot coverage issue, and it is, you know, 5% is not again a massive thing, and it's not spot zoning. It's saying that this. I appreciate your point about like, oh, they could go for a variance, but that's an onerous process that costs thousands of dollars. So you're just layering another burden on someone with historic property. If you say, well, to do that, you're going to need a variance. We were just trying to make something that was standard for just the historic properties.
And not everyone's gonna jump on it, but if it helps them out,
Yeah, I don't think it's enough to motivate someone to designate themselves historic, because I think the burden is still far greater being historically nominated than any benefit they get from this.
I think, I you know, I understand, you know, And my thing is, people are allowed to disagree, you know?
Sure,
Doesn't
of
mean
course.
doesn't mean you're a bad person, you
No,
know?
no, yeah, yeah,
You know, and I understand, you know, what you're saying, you know, and I think that if we had everything identified, like, if it didn't take a year and we had everything identified, and we're sitting here saying, but incentivizing in advance, you know, on a planning and zoning thought process, we'd rather, I would think that we'd rather see things moving as things grow and everything grows in Minturn, more compliance with our code versus perks for less compliance. And like I said, and we might not agree on that for sure.
No,
But
and I think that's a great goal for planning and zoning. It certainly makes a lot of sense. And, you know, as historic preservation, our goal is to promote historic preservation. So I could see how that could be somewhat in conflict. But I think, as you pointed out, there are very few properties that are going to really be affected. So does that really impact the long-range planning of the town? I don't know.
And like you said, we've
Can I
had,
piggyback on that? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
sorry.
yeah, we've had a bunch of
Yeah.
the projects that didn't get nominated, even though someone could have. So.
Right.
yeah, that was part of my first point, that, you know, a lot of stuff is out there that didn't get nominated, you know.
Mainly there's shacks. and
Correct.
Structurally,
Correct. You know, that there's shacks and there's, you know, yeah, as well as there's maybe 10 or 15 total in town that would be nominated, you know, and out of 10 or 15, maybe 3 out of 15 would be like, ooh, that's beneficial for me. But go ahead, Trey. Yeah,
Oh, I was gonna exactly address that in that, you know, we've been in existence for what, 2.5 years, and I think it's, in my opinion, sorry, I'm just gonna be blunt, brazenly honest here. I mean, it's been very hard to designate things. And, you know, even to get those twin houses that are, you know, enantiomers, I used to teach chemistry,
a lot of
so I
work.
have to use that word, but they're kind of opposites, twins. I mean, it's not only is it, you know, it's not on people's radars, there's not a ton of existing properties now that could be designated, which we do know. I mean, there's criteria, it has to be, you know, 75 years. But also it hasn't been popular. And so then, you know, the town has to nominate, and then it's still an uphill battle because it has to go through you guys and council. So it's like getting, you know, I mean, it's a major thing to get something designated. And it seems to be harder now because our council has changed with their ideas of property ownership, and in addition, it has to have 2 nominators, thanks to me probably. But so essentially, I really appreciate where you're coming from because you've worked really hard, and I'm glad you've put in this work. But honestly, I don't think it's going to be like this issue that pops up that's going to cause a lot of duress. You know what I mean? Like, how do we make this work? You know, and it goes to you guys. I think that probably this won't come up a lot. I mean, it probably will come up because if you say it won't, it will. But I don't think it will be like this constant stream of battles now. You know, you sat in there, you know, 3 feet, and you know,
I agree.
because also there's, you know, we are not the deciders, we're just the recommenders. So, you know, we can say this, but then there's other layers. So I'm just kind of saying this to kind of, 1, I think it's realistic, and 2, just to like allay your fears because you have been working hard and that's appreciated. So, but I'm not sure it's going to really be that onerous.
And I understand and I respect the historic, your time, because I think there are places that haven't been nominated yet that are very important historical properties in Minturn. And I know that, like you said, it's definitely been an uphill battle it's definitely been an uphill battle for you, and none of you would be sitting there if you didn't love Minturn and love the history of Minturn. And you know, and I thank you all for that. I just think, I already stated what I think.
It's appreciated.
No need to be redundant, but
I already
Frankly, I wish all the setbacks were 10 feet everywhere, but for new construction. But I don't make the rules, you know, but I appreciate,
you know,
you coming here.
but I like on my property, one side of my house is pretty close to the property line. I just basically gave my 2 feet to my neighbor, and we have a gate that we pass through for maintenance, but his house is, you know, probably 10 feet away from mine, and it works fabulously actually, because on the other side of my house, I get a much bigger yard that's actually usable. So
no, it's been Minturn.
so it's actually like in my case, just because that's the way they built all those houses all at once, it actually works out great. You know, having building on the property line and then on one side, and then you get a whole yard on the other. It almost works out better than everyone having these tiny, narrow, 10-foot alleyways that you can put a ladder at, and that's about, and a bike. And so now instead I get, you know, a 15 to 20-foot yard on one side and nothing on one side. So there is benefits for having it shifted.
Until you move. You know, but no, I agree, and I understand where you're coming from, and I just wanted to put, you know, say what I had to say. Apparently, whatever you decide is coming to planning commission before it goes to council anyway, so we can revisit it.
Lots of checks and balances. Almost too many if you're trying to develop.
You know.
So it's a time process, but we also want to encourage people to think about it, and not just rush to, oh, we got to build this thing quick as possible, which, you know, it does cost money the more the length of time it takes. So we have been trying to streamline the process also, but I would love to find some other ideas of like, how do we encourage people to take care of their old place? The people with the purple house just repainted, and I think that they did an amazing job just putting a fresh coat of paint on, and then we can encourage that more.
I wish we could pay for the paint. Like,
No, and watching, like for a fact, there's no doubt that the extensive process just on the 2 buildings here was an extensive process that you went through. I congratulate you on getting through that. You know, it was a very extensive process. The saloon was probably a little easier, you know.
It was already under construction. So.
Yeah, so, but anyway, yeah.
Well, thank you for your contribution. We really do appreciate it.
your point.
Yeah, it's good to be aware that other agencies in town are also concerned about what we propose. Lynn, do you have any comments?
I have questions and comments. Madison, where are we on the money we got for identifying houses? You said they were trying to get it done a little sooner. Have they come back to you at all and told us when they'll be doing that?
We won't be getting it done any sooner. At the last meeting, I believe I gave like the breakout of the timeline, but the completion date is still December 2025.
2025 before we get those houses identified?
Yes.
Okay. Can a person who owns a historic house and nominate it themselves get it passed without having to meet all the criteria? Can they just come in and say, I want to make it historical?
No, they have to still, they have to meet
criterias.
at least, like, we don't have a certain number of criteria that they have to meet, but they have to meet at least one
So the age
criteria.
of the house,
I'm sorry,
the age of the house.
is 75 years plus an eligibility criteria.
Okay.
In fact, like 75 years is the threshold that we use for like demolition and stuff like that, altering of properties. But that's not technically a criteria for historic designation. So if something happened in a house that was super famous 30 years ago, you could nominate that and have that designated as historic. 75 was just the threshold that we put in place for things happening to properties that weren't designated, if that makes sense. That's the year that that's the span of the year that we use to say, hey, okay, if you're gonna demolish, you have to go through this 2-week stay. If you're gonna alter more than 50% of the exterior of your house, you have to go through the 2-week stay because it's 75 years old. And that's certainly kind of like the kind of base level, but exceptions can be made to that when it comes to actually designating a property if something super famous happened in a property that's not 75 years old.
Kelly, last time we had a meeting, you started to allude to the fact that you thought possibly holding back on changing anything else at the moment since we had just done 7 changes and possibly turning our interests and intentions into coming up with other things that might help the historical. Do you remember that?
Yep.
I agree with you on that. I think at the moment we've done 7 changes. We need to leave them the way they are and see how they work out. I think we need to start focusing on how we can create events, create knowledge that we're historical, saying maybe the Eagle County Historical Society come out and have an evening where people can come in and learn about the town. A few months ago, I went down to the historical meeting down there that brought up the Colorado Railroad Museum lady, and she gave like a 45-minute talk about how the railroad got established in the mountains. I thought that would be a great thing we could do for if we had a little bit of money. Michelle mentioned that they were trying to put a little money in the budget this year for us to do some advertising or promotion, I think was the word she used, for the planning and zoning. It was a great talk. They had a gentleman there who had donated lots of things to the museum that he had found in his, I think his father's or grandfather's garage up here. It was amazing to learn about how this railroad was established. And I think we need to get the public, and I think winter's a good time to do that, right, because they're more here than they are running around in the summer. That we are historical now. I think being a historical town brings as much to the economy as anything else once you get it out there. There are a lot of people who want to go to those towns, and we just need to get people knowing that we're working on that. It isn't so much as nominating more and more buildings, although we'll have more hopefully, but it's getting the word out there and maybe using that a little bit, getting those plaques up on the buildings that we have, getting the barn moved to the park and working on that. You know, I bet we could come up, it's not going to be a museum, but I bet we could come up with things that you have and I have, or that pipe that was in here, there it is, you know, to put in and around there that people can go and get a little bit of the history, just like coming to the building and walking up the stairs. And I think that until we actually test things out, we don't need to keep changing things. I have a hard time with that. As I said in the last meeting, I would consider discussing the side setbacks, but I don't agree with front and back. I think those lots are already 80%, aren't they? Coverage?
Which lots? What lots?
Well, if you're doing downtown, and that's where you do have room to do some addition, but if you shrink them down, you're gonna lose all the parking, and I don't agree with losing all the parking.
Well, any parking requirement would have to be met regardless. We haven't talked about any reduction of
If
parking.
you shrink the lot though, where are you gonna put the parking?
Well, no, but they would still have to meet.
They'd still have to meet the parking in one way or another. So maybe they could encroach in a setback in one location, but then have a greater setback to allow for parking in another. It just gives flexibility.
You
Because
know,
they would still have to provide the parking. If there's parking required for a lot, they can't not provide parking. It just gives them flexibility about how they do that, where they can put it on the lot, how it fits in. It just,
well, I just think that with all the time and all the money, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that went through the community plan and getting this ordinance together, that the fact that we're trying to change so many things already is a little bit early in the game. I'd like to see some of that play out. I read through the design review for downtown and looked at the Wooner, which is exactly what I thought it was. There's not a lot of room to fiddle with the lots down there. Now, if you're talking about going into a residential neighborhood, I still have issues on how that will affect neighbors and things like that. I don't think there are that many more buildings in this town that are actually historically valuable in the sense of meeting all the criteria. I don't think private residences are that easily to prove that way. I think your commercial zones and things like that is where you find them. because that was the first part of Minturn. I mean, going down my street, George Broden's house could have been historical. It's still underneath there.
Sorry.
But it's built around, same with mine. Underneath my walls is a stucco home, just like the little ones on the corner that Darren owns. But there's not the history there to pull it through that criteria. And I would like to see us start focusing, becoming a little more creative as to how do we get this word out there? How do we get people coming here to see it? And what do we have to show them when they come? You know, one Christmas, when the winter market got pushed inside because the weather was so bad, the historical company our society had come down to walk people through the town. Well, they put, and we talked about this at another meeting, they put one person in this store, one person in that store. My store was packed with people, packed, because they knew that person from the historical society was in there, and they could go up, and they were dressed in costume, and there were 2 per store in some of them, so that they did a little like play off of each other. Oh, I'm Mary from, you know, I'm Helen from Helen's house, and my husband was, and that kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. And I'd like to see us try to get into doing creative things more than giving away things.
So Lynn, I agree with you that having more activities that promote our historic qualities, but that's not the role of this commission. This commission
Yes,
is
it
historic.
is. I disagree.
The role of this commission
I
is,
disagree.
may I please finish my statement?
Yes, go right ahead.
The role of this commission is historic preservation of existing structures or objects in town that we find are adding to that historic character of the town. That's the purpose of this commission. That all the code that talks about is about how do we protect buildings that are historically important or objects. And frankly, like the water tank is a perfect example. The trees in front of those twin houses, I think those are objects that should be preserved. But there is a historical society that does do the things that you're talking about, and I think having our town promote that is a great idea, but I don't know that that's necessarily the role of this commission. I don't see it anywhere in our code that describes that being part of our role.
Madison, if we get through, just a thought, a big thought, say 5 years from now, we've gone through, there's no more houses to nominate. Does this commission still exist?
That'd be up to council.
Well, it would, because if
What
someone
would they
wants,
be doing?
if someone wants to alterate something, they would have to come before us to talk about the alterations.
That's true.
And that would go on indefinitely.
So we would still exist, but we'd have minimal unless we had our role. I sat at a council meeting a few weeks ago, and one of the council members recommended that the historical commission start looking at creating other things to do. I'm just telling you, Dan,
Can I make a comment when you're
yeah, that's what I heard, and I agreed with it. Because I think that we are going to work on historical, but we can also take another part of us and be creative on pulling people into that. And starting to make people come here and want to see historical, and when people in this town see people coming here for that, they may want to become historical.
But if we lose those buildings, then we've lost what gives this town that character.
Well, that's our primary function.
Which is why I think the reason we proposed these changes why council asked us to look for other options was because they recognize it's a burden on people to be designated historic, and so this is a way to reduce those burdens. I think there's some specific discussions around what was proposed that we might want to touch on, but the 80-90% lot coverage and maximum impervious surface coverage, most lots in town, if you satisfy the setbacks, don't even get near those limits, even in downtown. So I think allowing for these changes in setbacks, there may be some places where we want to restrict it. So, like for example, a 5-foot relief on a 5-foot setback is a 0 lot line. And I'm not sure if we want to allow that. We could say, it should always be a minimum of 3 feet. And frankly, like a 3-foot relief of a side setback could be 2 feet, when I think what we're saying is it should be no less than 3 feet.
Okay. And that's why I said at the beginning that I hoped that I had interpreted the discussion correctly, but
Well, and by, it's just the way it's worded. I think you were after the same approach, that it could be to within 3 feet of a property line. And I think the other ones could be to within 5 feet, but not a zero lot line. I don't think we want to be promoting that
Right.
for anyone. And then the 5% changes in lot coverage are pretty minimal, I think. And I've looked at a dozen houses that I think should be designated. I think this applies to residential, absolutely. There are plenty of houses in town that are of residential nature that are old and have character to them that are worth preserving.
I have no problem designating mine. I just not on my priority list because I'm not going to sell it or do anything with it. But
Has not your exterior been changed?
Huh?
Has your exterior not been changed?
Since it was built in '37, yes. But I mean, it hasn't been added to. I mean, a window was put in, and
Siding?
no, it's been stuccoed, and I have no idea when that was stuccoed. But it was originally a log house. But I haven't changed my siding. I like the fire. I personally like it being fireproof. As an
And I
ex-firefighter.
question 6 feet spacing between buildings that are as old as some of them are in certain areas of town.
On what basis?
Fire,
That's what the 6 feet is designated.
yes, but is that classified as new construction or old construction?
That's the fire code for
But do they,
buildings on the same lot or adjacent lots.
correct, but does it in any way designate whether that is a new constructed house with a lot more fire recommended things than it does a home that was built in 1927 being next door to a home that was built in 1930?
I think the siding hasn't changed a whole lot. Wood clapboard siding is wood clapboard siding, whether it's, I mean, we don't, it's something which I would like to see changed in town, is to make our houses more fireproof with new construction and require different finishes, but instead of wood clapboard siding, using a cementitious panel siding, but I don't believe there's any difference between the current code fireproofness of a house versus something built. I would actually argue that some of the houses built longer ago had thicker siding that would be more fire resistant. Nowadays they go to like 3/8 inch thick siding material. So, I mean, if you're building in California, the codes, and you're in a fire zone, the codes are far more restrictive and fireproof. But in Colorado, it's not the case.
California gets some pretty big fires.
Well, so
Yeah,
do
which
we
is-
though, and we
Yeah,
have a lot of dead wood.
And we really should be approaching the codes that California's using.
I
think
still,
that makes no sense, but
I still believe there are other issues that we could be looking at and dealing with. rather than-
are there other issues that we can do that will make it easier for someone to be designated? Like if they are designated, that takes the burden off them somehow?
I don't, well, you see a bigger burden than I do, let's put it that way. I understand, I already owned a historical home. And I think the issues with downtown had a lot more to do than just, I mean, one of those homes was already sold from the day one of those people came in and was willing to work with it. The other one was a large corporation that has much property down here that needed a little more encouragement. And I think we got it by changing 7 different things. I don't think it's making, and both of those lots have room for building on them.
Yeah.
It's not like 3, and it can only be to the new addition, it can't be to the old part of the house. So how much difference is that gonna make, really? You can't, and I don't see anybody even wanting to do it to the old part of the house because wouldn't it be cost effective? I mean, if you've got a 50-foot house and you're adding 2 feet to each side and the back, that's gotta be horrendous, and you can't because you've gotta keep the outside, so.
Well, but the old part of the house you'd retain, but in the back of the lot, you'd have greater setbacks, or less setbacks, more room within the lot to build out the back more completely, to offset the fact that you can't build out the front, because you can't modify that part. That's the whole point. It's not gonna happen to the whole lot. It's just gonna happen to the area where they can do work in. And because they can't do any work where the historic portion of the house is, in this instance, the front, then you're just trying to make it easier for them to develop the rear. But,
I'm a hard character to crack, I speak straight.
and I appreciate your concern about parking, but
I have been on enough boards and committees and talked to plenty of comments from my customers of my 42 years in business in Minturn, not just the store. I had another space outside of town for 8 years. I had a business I ran out of here for 42 years. And I know the things that people tell me they love about the town. And increasing density is to that degree is not necessarily it. I mean, they love what they see. I went into Lions Head a few weeks ago, and I was shocked at what happened to the views of that mountain with the development in Lions Head, because I hadn't been there in years. I mean, you couldn't see the mountain when you were walking down the street where, what was that famous bar? Bar Yeti's was.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, there are
Destroyed it.
there are
They
a
destroyed
few
it.
properties that this is going to affect. So the point is helping those few that are there. But I know Ken's in support of these changes. I'm in support of these changes. It sounds like, Lynn, you're not in support of moving it forward.
Not currently. I would like us to see, the major thing is I would like to see the houses identified first.
I'm trying to move forward on this
Yes.
subject at the moment. Right now, you're not interested
Right
in
now,
support.
I'm not interested.
And Tracy, how are you feeling about it?
I mean, we've already talked about these and, I mean, I'm okay with them, but I do think that Lynn brings up an excellent point, that it's time to really engage people, and I do absolutely agree that it is part of our mission, and the reason it's part of our mission to go outside numbers and setbacks and all is because it helps a program grow. It's like advertising. It's the way you engender support. I mean, I worked for the National Park Service for many years. We don't just sit up there and patrol our wilderness when we work in the Tetons. What we do is we have programs for people. We put money into that. We educate them because that's the only way you develop an ethic for preservation, be it land, be it history. You know, this kind of history is not taught in school. You know, you learn about World War II and causes, but you don't learn about your local history. I mean, you can take a course and pay for it at CMC, but I do think that it is, I just want to set the record straight on that part because I felt like it was kind of glossed over, that I don't think that our job is relegated to just designing code for involving setbacks and for incentives. I think that it's much bigger than that because our overall goal is historical preservation of things that are not getting knocked down right and left. And if that's what you have to do, if it has a program that's pretty low cost, you get a volunteer to come in and talk about history of mining, which is very colorful. I mean, if you read the stuff out of Breckenridge and the brothels and what went on, you know, I mean, it's like so entertaining. And like, that's just a way to garner support, you know, interest, sell your product. And I do think it's a part of, I'm starting to go on and on, but I do think it is a part of our mission. And we have been talking about it too, Robert, just so you know, for the last 2 years, we've been talking about outreach. And so, you know, I'm not trying to undermine what you said, but I have to disagree on that. And I do think that that's something that, you know, I've said I would help do, and I haven't made that, but I agree with that. Back to this, you know, I mean, I'm not an expert on architecture and codes and all, but I mean, since we've talked about this, like, I'm okay with it. Like I said earlier, I don't think it's going to impact a tremendous amount of properties, but I do think offering whatever we can to people as an incentive is important, because the way things are going and the knocking down and the new buildings coming up, it's not going to be the Minturn that our customers talk about or did talk about in their store. So I think it's a multifaceted approach that we need to take to gain support.
Do you, just so that I can start kind of getting a tally, Robert had made the comment of switching the language around when it comes to setbacks, instead of saying side setback relief of 3 feet, instead of saying side setback can be up to 3 feet. So that they can't get any closer to the property line than 3 feet rather than
Oh, 3 feet, but I really want a variance for 2 feet. is
Right,
what you're
exactly.
saying.
So, do you agree with Robert in switching
Yeah.
the language around, saying that the
Yes.
side setback
Up
should be
to-
up to be 3 feet,
No
front
less than
setback
3 feet.
no less than 3 feet, front
Yeah.
setback no less than 5 feet, rear setback no less than 5 feet.
Yes.
So I,
And then Kelly, sorry,
Yeah,
we're working our way down.
well, I
You
just,
know, answer really
or
quick.
you- if she's done.
JC, just,
Oh, no,
I just,
I'm not sure I answered the question, actually, and I apologize for that. I got a little tangented off there. What was, I don't have
What was
anything
the
else
question?
unless I didn't answer the question.
I think you did actually. I just wanted to comment that.
You
I
could be in
agree-
politics.
I agree with your point that education is helpful to the cause, absolutely. I just didn't realize it was in our responsibility as a.
Well, it might not be stated, but, you know, I mean, that doesn't mean it doesn't include outreach.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure. No, and I think it's a good point. And it certainly would help.
I mean, the barn is an outreach. I mean, that will be an outreach because it'll be visible. There'll be talks about it. I mean, to me, it's implied that, you know, you kind of do what you can. That's as long as it's legal to, you know, to get that goal of
Mhm.
preserving properties. I mean, I'm not deviating from the goal. I just
Right.
think that there's multiple ways to get to the same goal.
And I think you did answer my question by saying that, yeah, you feel like
Up to
every approach that we can make here is worth considering.
yeah, and I like the up to
Yeah.
verbiage too. So.
Kelly?
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure if this change would affect any of the buildings, but it might help one person that needs that extra foot or something. So I would probably be for it, but I don't think the majority of the people are maybe gonna bite on it.
It's not gonna make a massive difference for anyone.
But I don't think it's gonna hurt anything either, as far as that goes. So I'd probably be in favor of it, cause I don't think it's that massive of a change. And like I said, it would be for the new development, and it still has to pass the reviews of everything.
Right, and planning may adjust it, council may adjust it further, but I think if we just say, this is where historic preservation is trying to make a dent in difficulty.
And if P and Z doesn't like it, it won't, in town council, it won't get passed, but we can,
We're in advisory role, so-
but we can put it out there.
Robert, can I ask, it's an easy question.
Sure.
So,
Hmm?
oh, I'm sorry. Mike Floyd, 502.5 Eagle Street, Minturn, Colorado. I appreciate everything that you talked about, everything that you do. And just because I don't know the answer to this, because it's being discussed here, Lynn will still be able to discuss it at P and Z? Is that it?
So, because this is under discussion direction, no formal action is being taken tonight. However, if it seems like there's general support for this ordinance going forward to get formal recommendation at HPC, potentially at the next meeting. At that point, then Lynn would have to decide whether or not she wants to talk about it and vote on it as an HPC member, or whether or not she wants to talk about it and vote on it as a planning commission member. She cannot vote on it twice.
I didn't know how conflict
Yeah.
works.
Yeah,
No.
it's a good question. So, on this subject of the incentives, so I think we're in general agreement, except for Lynn, that if we were to say, within the dimensions rather than a relief of that dimension.
Kelly, are you in agreement with?
The change, yes.
Awesome.
And then there's this other aspect of the revocation of designation language. Did anyone have any comments about that coming from Lisa?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Because
Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you for going to the podium to say thank
Thank you, I appreciate it, it's good to see you.
Um, You know, I want to apologize first because this is not my area of expertise, but like it seems A and B. Okay, so one is talking about being altered to agree that degree that no longer retains. And then the other's talking about destroyed, which I assume is like a fire or a natural disaster. I mean, are they that different, A and B? That the words that describe like the change that could happen.
Not necessarily. So A is what we currently have in our code right now.
Okay.
And so I retained some of that just because it was currently in our code. And then B and C are completely Buena Vistas with a couple of words
Right.
changed, like Board of County Commissioners or Board of Commissioners to Town Council, things like that. But if there's consensus that, you know, A is just kind of really just restated in B and it's redundant, then I can get rid of A. That's pretty easy.
Well, I was just wondering if there was actually a technical difference. That's why, like altered maybe because of like there was a addition put on versus a big conflagration that burned. You know, that's all I was just curious about. I'm not kind of arguing them. I'm just wondering if they have different meanings
They
in a legal stance.
They technically do have different meetings. Obviously, I mean, we talked about that with the last ordinance, you know, alter 50% or more versus demolish. Obviously, they have different connotations and they have different definitions within our code.
Mhm.
So this definitely, I think, applies to a broader category just because it is hitting both of those different definitions and both those different categories of structures.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction. Like if a tree fell and knocked off the front of one of those twin houses, that'd be a not completely destroyed
Right.
scenario.
Yeah.
But it would lose its historic meaning because it's no longer intact.
Right.
And then C seems more like process.
Yes, which was I really liked.
Yeah.
I like when the code gives me direction on how to do things.
And I'm guessing Buena Vista probably vetted these decisions.
I would hope so. It's in the
better
code.
than we did in our little rush to get everything done. But
Any other comments about revocation of designation?
Oh, that was helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure
So-
I understood that.
I get the sense that there's a general consensus that to go ahead and write it up as a proposal for us to discuss for sending to PNC. And
Take direction from 3, and I heard from 3 people that there was support of this ordinance.
Ken also was in support. So. Okay. Any more comments on this subject?
Yeah, I know that we don't think that knowledge or advertising is great, but I did talk to Ella Brunette, and she said she would be happy to come down and speak with us sometime.
Oh.
Whether it be not full room of people, it would probably have to be first thing in the week, you know, early as possible. I don't know when it might happen, probably not till after the holidays. And a few other people that I know, but I think with Ella, it might be great if we just had her alone,
Mhm.
being that she is 98 years old and not exposed her to a bunch of people.
Makes sense.
And she could come in and we could ask questions. She will not present,
Right.
but she would be happy to answer any questions we have. So in the back of your mind, maybe start writing some down, and if we can get it together after the holidays.
Are you talking at one of our meetings then?
I explained it would probably be on a Wednesday night about 5:30. Would that be too late? And she goes, no, that would be okay.
Great.
So Wednesday,
Tuesday.
town council meeting.
I mean Tuesday. I
Okay,
said.
oh, okay, okay.
I apologize.
No, no worries.
I go to council on Wednesday. I get mine on Wednesday. That's it. But she was willing to do it, and I think, being that she's 90 years old, we start there and see how much we can get. I think her niece Phyllis is another one, and Terry Pearson, because they were both born in, I believe, in the hospital at the mine.
Gilman.
At Gilman, yeah. And I think well, Phyllis said she would, but she said talk to Terry too. I think Lynn Kanakis would probably be another good one.
Yep.
Can you come up with any others?
Well, a side note, we did this last month lose
Burnett?
Mr. Myers.
Oh, Mr. Myers, I saw that in the paper, and we just lost Lovato,
I didn't see that one.
last week. 85, Parkinson's.
Well, these are people who are diminishing resource that we need to
Yes.
tap into as soon as we can.
Yes, and there was someone else I thought of too, and I'll try to think of it. But those were people that, like I've already talked to Phyllis, she suggested Terry. Oh, they also mentioned Lovato's wife. What's her nickname?
Jackie?
Huh?
Jackie?
No. It's another nickname. She would be really good at it because she knows a lot. And Terry, I've talked to at the store in the years past when she used to come in. We used to always talk about interns. She knows a lot too. But like I said, I think if Phyllis would come probably with Ella because she'd probably bring her.
For sure.
And we might have to, being winter's a hard time of the year to get her in the building. We'd have to consider that. But I think the sooner the better if we can.
Yeah. And maybe
think
give her a
that'd
seat
be
at the
great.
table with Mike. So I think this sounds like this is covering commission comments and future agenda items. Are there other?
Yeah, I think we've kind of melted into that. I did send this to.
No, they'd be good.
Any
She
other-
just suggested Elmer and Bev Christensen.
I agree.
That might be in a couple other names. Who else can we think of?
I think this is, really important, this living history, because
Mhm.
once it's gone, it's just,
And if there's any way we could, if we
Record it.
do it here, we'd be recording it,
Yeah.
right? So we'd have it on tape.
At least could go
and
back.
maybe we could, sorry, Robert, but I'm gonna say advertise, like, maybe, like just try to put
So
something.
you guys, I think.
more than- I know,
Where I was
you're
going.
never gonna live that down. No, just kidding. But it'd be fun if it could be like kind of, I just realized it's gonna be after the holidays, but if we could kind of maybe advertise it a little bit more as a kind of a fun, come on, bring your friends.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know how much of that we should do because with
Oh,
COVID going around
I see.
and
Yeah,
people
yeah.
being
All
at
right.
that
Fair
age
enough.
level, it might be
Yeah.
better if we just take a couple at
Okay.
a time
Yeah.
and pull what they have to give us.
Okay.
And then
Fair
maybe we can somehow coordinate that into doing a presentation for the public.
That's true. Yeah.
One of my favorite things, I actually do enjoy reading the Ville Daily, and I love what happened 10, 20, 50,
Right, yeah.
60 years ago. And Minturn pops up every once in a while, and last month it did, and I sent it to Michelle, but we just had our 120-year anniversary, and it kind of slipped by us with zero celebration and advertising on November 15th, which was last Friday.
Sent out an e-blast.
But it was.
Should have been a big
It
celebration.
should have been a
120
huge
120. That's a big
We
deal.
just turned
You should have
120
a big
on
party.
last Friday, and we kind of had a missed opportunity. I just want to mention.
Yeah. That's for sure.
The other person I thought was Richard Galloway, old dog. He was at Ella's birthday party. He's 84 now. And it was just such a kick to see him. I haven't seen him in years.
I've actually never met him.
You never met Old Dog?
No.
And I asked Joe, what's his last name? He used to take care of the hotel for Old Dog.
Yeah, just Joe.
Just Joe.
He
Just
doesn't need a
Joe.
last name.
Gosh.
But gosh, yes. If he thought Old Dog would do it, he said, yeah. But we'd have to get set something up there too. But he was still Minturn. He came in a plaid flannel shirt and bibbers and his white sort of straggly white beard. And he snuck up to Ella and he goes, I heard about this and I could not come. And I don't know, I guess he gets out and about, but I haven't seen him in years. He was one of the first characters in Minturn that I met. It was great.
Okay, any other commission comments or agenda items for the future? Not hearing any, I'll take it. Oh,
Yeah,
oh, oh, oh.
Well, we got sidetracked, and I've been just slammed at work, like unbelievable. But we there was talk months ago about possibly like the water tower of having something else that we could nominate that wasn't quite owned by a property owner.
Well, everything's owned by somebody.
Somebody.
And that probably
Maybe
could be
something
the
that's
town winter.
town.
So I'm just,
Can we designate Forest Service properties?
can we look into discussing it or ideas of possible ideas,
I
such
think
as the water tower?
I'd love to go through and do a tree survey of his trees that are significant in town. I think that'd be a good idea.
Oh, you're talking to somebody who went to forestry school, that would be wonderful.
And I think they really do add to the character and
That was a point I brought up it had been brought up by Ken as well, but if you save those homes, you more likely save those trees.
Well, I do remember,
Shade trees, there's
But
nothing
I
like
might tell
shade.
you about those trees. They need somebody who's willing to put the money into them to have them pruned badly.
I bet, yeah.
And if I were to win the lottery, I would give it to the town to convince the owners to do it. I had one of those trees on my property in Buena Vista. And I had, in the 20-some years I owned that house, I think I had to have it done 3 times. But that's what helps keep them healthy, because they're cottonwoods.
so I know you're new here, but the problem with our trees is the cottonwoods, they're not very strong. So the older and bigger they get, the more dangerous they kind of get unless they've been properly trimmed and maintained.
Mhm.
So it's not like a gigantic oak tree in Sonoma that, you know.
they fall down too.
But that is a problem with those trees.
But I mean, there's so many things we can do. For instance, we are a town that has tons of lilacs and tons of hollyhocks. Why couldn't we have a hollyhock festival at the end of July and August to draw people to come to the historical town? I mean, those are fun things that we can do in between, like things like saying, well, what else can we do right now? You know, think about those things, make notes, and maybe we can process some of them sometime.
And I also had an idea that as I like looking in the Vail Daily, in our newsletter, we could have what happened this month historically every month to get people kind of
Oh, an
teach
intern.
people
I
about
think that's a great idea.
our own
Kelly.
history. And I don't know if we can get that through the Vail Daily since they seem to have a pretty good.
Or maybe we can get added into that section, you know.
Well,
they
we
do
are added in, but I mean, we have our own newsletter that we put out every month, and if we did do what happened on the, during this month,
50 years.
yeah, long
Oh, monthly.
time ago,
Yes,
you
in our
know,
newsletter.
fun articles.
Yeah.
I think it might be something. Well, it's
I'd
also
be willing
educational
to-
for the whole
I'm
town.
not real good at that kind of thing, but I'd be willing to help out.
But I'm sure the Vail Daily has an archive of it somehow.
Even
What
if we
happens
just
on
did
this
it to
date?
start year by year rather than month by month, because that takes a lot of work. But if we could come up with one event every year, that would be great. We might be able to do that through Pete's book, through people like Ella, or, one every decade.
But I do
I
think
like
the Vail
that.
Daily could help us out on that since they do seem to
They have-
know what happened when, and it was probably
And they probably have an all searchable database now. So.
easier than us.
Sure.
So midterm that
Yeah.
you some.
But I'm just fascinated every time I see it. Every time I see it, I keep like, oh, I should clip that out and just save them, along with everything else I save.
I have a copy of a book that a customer told me about. I can't remember the title of it. But she said, I had to come see this town after I read the book. And I'm like, what book was it? And it was a book written about Robert Minturn's daughter. And so I had Bookworm find it for me. And I haven't read the whole thing yet, but we're out there.
Yeah, and like having a storytelling, Rob from the mattress store has tons of stories about
Oh, he's a
Well,
character.
his store, the history of his store, and people coming
His
in.
mother's store? Or his that mattress shop?
I don't know.
Well, Grammy's Attic was an antique store when I moved to
Yeah.
town, and it was his mom.
But he has stories of the Myers garage being there. And all that.
Okay, I can
But-
see Robert sitting down there going, okay, we've talked about this enough. I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
And one a second motion.
Oh, I'll second that.
Very All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Our